I'm finally getting back to working on my 240D here. This is the 240D with the 4-speed manual transmission, and I've been getting it ready to go on a long road trip. This will be the next car I sell to go cross-country for someone who wants to go on a real old Mercedes-Benz adventure. That's what we call it. It's going to be an adventure. But like the other cars I've sold, I've been going through this car and there's a lot of things I've had to replace. I want to tell you right away, please do not ask how much I want for the car or when it will be ready. I just don't know yet. The final price probably will reflect how much I've had to do to the car and how many parts I've had to replace. But there's one thing right from the start that I wanted to deal with, and that is the rear end ratio on these cars. Now the 240D from the factory had a 3.69 to 1 ratio rear end. And that was fine for acceleration. You know, getting off the line, it certainly wasn't going to snap your neck. But boy, you get out on the freeway going 60, 65, 70 miles an hour, and this engine is just screaming. So I wanted to drop that screaming down a little bit for the person who's going to drive this thing 3,000 miles cross country. And so I chose to put in a rear end out of a 1984 300D turbo, and that's a 3.07 to 1 ratio. Now there are going to be some compromises. I would not do this if it were an automatic transmission, but I'm willing to do it if it's a manual, because with a manual transmission I can kind of control the shift, okay? Because it is going to be a little more doggy off the line, but when you get out on the freeway and you're cruising, it's going to be a lot quieter and you're going to get a lot better fuel economy. And for those of you who know about these rear ends, you know, some of you say, well, why don't you put a 2.88 to 1 ratio out of an 85 model? Well, I've done that on a 240D. And I feel it's just too much. It just makes the car too doggy. Granted, if all you're going to do is freeway driving, that might be an option. But if you want an all-around 240D 4-speed, my humble opinion, I don't recommend a 2.88 or ratio. 2.88 is great to put in those turbo diesels from the 1981 to 1984 era, because the 2.88 rear end, by the way, was only produced in the W123 in 1985. So it took a while to find a good rear end. I wanted to find one out of a low mileage car. This came out of a car with approximately 160,000 miles on it. And I opened this thing up. It's just beautiful inside. I'm going to take you under the car here in a minute and show it to you. But along with replacing the rear end, the center differential, I also replaced the axles. Now I didn't have new ones, but I had some good used ones because the old ones were really in bad shape. Here's the rear end I pulled out of the car. You know, the ratio is stamped right here in this flat section of the differential. You have to clean this off, but you'll be able to see a ratio right there, and you want to check that out, of course, if you're going to replace your rear end. But take a look at these axles. This one over here, both boots were badly torn. The axle shafts themselves are a little worn. So even if I didn't replace this rear end, I was going to have to replace the axles. But the more I thought about it, the more I decided this thing had to go. In my humble opinion, this is one of the better modifications you can make to a 240D with a manual transmission. There are no external differences between these two rear ends. This is just a straight bolt-in. And like I said, as long as all your bolts are rust-free and you kind of know what you're doing, this comes out fairly quickly. You can see here I've also replaced the rear differential rubber mount, which is a very common wear item. And I've also replaced the rear flex disc. While I was at it, I put new shock absorbers in it. I replaced both the rotors and put on new calipers and new flexible brake hoses here. You can see I've still got to put some new exhaust hangers in here and do a few more things under here before I'm done. But just look at how clean this 240D is underneath. In a future video, I'll take you up front and show you some of the things we've done on the front suspension. And we're also working inside all the doors, doing a lot of things inside the car to get this ready for its long road trip. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, Ken, how hard a job is this? Well, it's not that bad. It only takes, 3 or 4 hours if you have a lift, if you have a transmission jack like you see here, and you've done it before. Because things come apart pretty easily if you have a rust-free car. And let me tell you, folks, this 240D here is probably the most rust-free W123 I've ever seen. I'll put a link in the description below this video, take you back to one of the original videos I did that will show you the body and sheet metal condition of this car. It's really quite amazing. But back to this job here, you could probably do it on the ground. You'd have to have a couple guys, you'd have to have some sort of a transmission ground jack, you'd have to be able to support the car adequately because you're literally dropping the swing arms all the way down. That means you have to pull the shocks off, pull the sway bar links off, pull off the calipers. You've got to drop those trailing arms all the way down, pull out the axles, and then unbolt and drop that center differential, what people call the pumpkin. I just love these instructions say, you know, assembly is in reverse order of disassembly. Not always necessarily so, you know, you have to fight that thing to get it back in there, and that's why I recommend having some type of a transmission jack. It's heavy, it really is heavy. So I'm gonna keep working on this 240D here in a few days when the weather improves. I'll get in this car and take you on a road trip if I have the time and kind of show you how it performs and kind of explain the differences between the original rear end and this replacement. Obviously, the speedometer is not going to be accurate. You probably have to make some modifications to your driving habits and your shifting patterns when you do go for a lower ratio rear end in a 240D 4-speed.